One of the most important things about this area of the course is that you need to make sure you have the section numbers in any of the answers that you do, because the section numbers are the source of the law. So we saw that section 3 was about the definition of consumer, and you need to have that when you're answering a question about consumer. Just like what we're going to do now, you have to have the right section around misleading or deceptive conduct, section 18. Section 18 of the Australian Consumer Law was the old Section 52 under the Trade Practices Act, if you ever come across that. But we just need to remember it's Section 18 of the Australian Consumer Law. And what does it actually say? Let's have a read. A person must not, in trade or commerce, engage in conduct that is misleading or deceptive or is likely to mislead or deceive. So when you see the words there, what you can tell is that you don't necessarily, there's nothing in there that says it has to be deliberate. So you don't necessarily have to try to be misleading or deceive someone. If you do, though, it will become a breach. Also importantly, you can't put a disclaimer about things being misleading or deceptive. So all the stuff we did about disclaimer terms in a contract, it won't apply if it's about misleading or deceptive conduct as part of a consumer transaction. Disclaimers can't be applied to this section. And also, under the Australian Consumer Law, there are a wider range of remedies than what you would normally get under common law. So that's another reason why the Act is important. But we need to make sure that we understand the central component of any part of this section of the course is about understanding the words in the section. And then the cases back up the words in the section. And the words we have here is a person must not, in trade or commerce, engage in conduct that's misleading or deceptive or likely to mislead or deceive. And this is a particularly important slide because one of the key points about the consumer law and section 18 within the consumer law is that you don't necessarily need to be a consumer to rely on the section. And so a good case around that is Eveready Australia and Gillette Australia. What's this case about? Well, Gillette used to make Duracell batteries. Okay, so the Duracell batteries you might have seen in the shop. And they used to have a marketing campaign where they had the Duracell bunny. And as part of the marketing campaign, what they would do is they would put batteries in the bunny versus batteries in other toys and see which lasted longer. So it was to demonstrate that their batteries were better by lasting longer. And as part of that, Gillette made a series of ads where they showed the Duracell bunny lasting longer than other toy bunnies from other competing batteries. They included the claim that the batteries in the Duracell batteries would last 4 times longer than competitors' batteries. The heart of this problem is that there are actually 2 different kinds of batteries that you can buy, alkaline or zinc carbon. And it just so happens that alkaline lasts longer than zinc carbon. And that in this ad, Gillette was comparing its alkaline batteries to competitors' zinc carbon batteries. So it was saying this 4 times longer. They were comparing their alkaline batteries, saying they would last 4 times longer than the competitor batteries, but the competitor batteries were zinc carbon batteries. And so Eveready Batteries brought a civil action against Gillette, claiming that, look, this is misleading or deceptive because you really aren't making it clear that they're different kinds of batteries you're comparing. And in fact, we actually sell alkaline batteries and they won't last 4 times longer than our alkaline batteries. So you can see this misleading and deceptive element of the ad. The important thing for us to understand, though, is that here, Eveready is not a consumer, right? They're actually a competitor. And the court allowed them to actually bring this action. There is nothing that says you have to be a consumer to bring an action under Section 18. So that allows businesses to police the statements of the others. So the key point about Eveready Australia and Gillette Australia is that parties other than consumers can bring an action under our consumer laws. The second key aspect to this slide that's really important is it sets out the elements to an offence under Section 18. And we can see that there are three elements to that defence. The first one is that the business must engage in conduct. The second one is that that conduct must be in trade or commerce. And the third one is that the conduct must be misleading or deceptive or likely to mislead or deceive. So let's step through those three things. So anyone can bring an action, and what do they have to show? They have to show the business was engaged in conduct, that the conduct was in trade or commerce, and that that conduct was misleading or deceptive or likely to mislead or deceive. The first step is around conduct, and the courts give a very wide definition of conduct. It's just not what people actually do. Things like silence can be conduct, statements of opinion, predictions, promises, statements that are literally true but create a false impression in people's minds. All of these things are the conduct within the definition of the term. So what we have are the words of the Act around conduct, and then the interpretation of those words in case law. You'll remember from week 2 how the case law interprets the statutory law. And so when we're looking at what is conduct, a case to help us out is Henjo Investments and Collins Marrickville. So in Henjo Investments, we've got Henjo Investments is negotiating the sale of a restaurant to Collins Marrickville. Collins Marrickville comes to look at the restaurant as part of the sales process. One of the things when they look around is that they see that there's 128 seats in the restaurant. Now, obviously, that enters into their head and into the negotiations, saying, "Geez, there's 128 tables. I can make a certain amount of a certain amount of money with that size of business." But unfortunately, the restaurant license said that they could only have 84 people. So Henjo were actually operating in breach of the license of 84 and had put in a whole series, 44 extra seats in there, nearly 50% extra capacity. After the sale, Collins finds out about the limit in the license and commenced proceedings against Henjo. So Collins has gone in and seen it, and Henjo hasn't said, "Oh, look, we don't have 128 seats." And in this case, the court held that that was conduct. So the silence here, not telling them that we have too many seats, was conduct within the meaning of Section 18. So very clearly, conduct is interpreted very broadly by the courts. The second element, so we need conduct, and that conduct needs to be in trade or commerce. Things like being given directions on a building site, making statements about policy from a government or intent of a government, or even providing information in a series of lectures that might not be accurate. These things aren't actually considered trade or commerce. It has to have some element of buying or selling or advertising for it to be a trading or commercial character under the Act. The final thing we need to make sure is that it's misleading or deceptive or likely to mislead or deceive. Now, how do you work that out? And that is where we do. This is probably the most important case of the whole section, because whether something's misleading or deceptive or likely to mislead or deceive is probably the toughest bit of applying this section. So why don't we have a look at Taco Company of Australia and Taco Bell. So in Taco Company of Australia Incorporated and Taco Bell Limited, we have a very interesting case where there's a company by the name of Taco Bell Limited and a different company by the name of Taco Company of Australia. Now, Taco Bell Limited had been operating a store in Sydney for several years under the name Taco Bell. Now, you're probably aware that there's a US chain with the name Taco Bell, and Taco Company of Australia was actually trying to set up stores in Australia for the US chain. So it was they were going to be part of the US chain Taco Bell. But when they came to do it, they find, well, there's this Taco Bell Limited who already has a store under the name Taco Bell. And so they commenced an action under what was then Section 52, which is now, we know, Section 18 of the Australian Consumer Law, alleging that Taco Bell Limited was engaged in misleading and deceptive conduct by using this Taco Bell name, right, which was the same as that in the US chain. Well, Taco Bell Limited then countersued, saying, well, it's actually Taco Company of Australia because they're going to try and use our name, and it all got very messy. What did the court decide? The court decided that because Taco Bell Limited was there first, TCA, or Taco Company of Australia, so the US subsidiary, they were the misleading party because they were second, and it could be mistaken that they were actually referring to the original Australian Taco Bell company. Now, that's probably not the most important part of this. The most important part of the particular case was how they decided what was misleading or deceptive or likely to mislead or deceive. And this is the test, okay? The first thing you need to do is identify the sections of the public. So you don't ask a question, you don't ask a reasonable person test. So this is not the reasonable person test to work out whether something's misleading or deceptive. The first thing you need to do is, who is this appealing to? So who is taco sales kind of appealing to? Then, once you have that section, you then need to consider all who come within it, all who are in the section. And that would include the astute and the gullible, the intelligent and the not so intelligent, the well-educated as well as the poorly educated, men and women of various ages and pursuing a variety of vocations. And then you ask, would any of those be misled or deceived? So in some sense, you're actually after the lowest common denominator. If one of those sections is likely to be misled or deceived, then you have misleading and or deceptive conduct. And if only a small percentage of that target audience is likely to be misled or deceived, you've got a breach. So that's an important consideration when you're dealing with the definition of misleading or deceptive conduct. It's not a reasonable person test. It is a test of the target audience and the full spectrum who would be captured by that target audience. And if a small percentage of them could be misled or deceived, it's enough to suggest a breach of the section. It's also important to recognise that you can say things that are literally true but also mislead or deceive people. They will still be considered breaches under this section of the Act. This can make it very difficult around areas of puffery and things where it's meant to be obvious that it's not true. So there is this fine line between something being misleading or deceptive versus mere puffery or are statements that anyone should realise is not true. You run into most problems in this area with comparative advertising. And that's what we saw with the Energizer Bunny case, right? Where you compare two products, but you don't do that truthfully and honestly. That's when you can run into real problems. There is, thankfully for us, a limit around what misleading and deceptive is. And the limit we can see in this case here, McWilliams Wines and McDonald's. So McWilliams wants to market a wine of 2-litre bottles called the Big Mac of table wines. McDonald's vigorously defend anything that might infringe on their copyright, and they've got, of course, the hamburger, the Big Mac. It was, in fact, their best-selling hamburger. And McDonald's are arguing that McWilliams are engaging in misleading or deceptive conduct under Section 52, and now Section 18, by calling their wine the Big Mac of table wines. What did the federal court say? Well, they said in this instance, it's not misleading or deceptive because the market for table wine and the market for fast food hamburgers are very different. And so it's highly unlikely that consumers of hamburgers would be misled into thinking that the McWilliams table wine had anything to do with McDonald's. So it has to be close enough that there might be a misleading or deceptive statement to make someone think that the product was someone else's product. And that didn't occur when we were looking at table wines versus hamburgers. Okay, have a look at questions 2 or 3 on our activity sheet.